Ehab?
Yeah, this is Ihab. I'm sorry I didn't catch the name one more time.
Oh, my name is Jason.
Hey, Jason, how are you?
Not too bad. I'm the Network Operations Manager here at Adams.
Nice to meet you, Jason.
Yep. And I also have Andy Smith on the phone. He's the Senior Network Engineer and NOC Supervisor.
Hi, Andy.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
That's good.
Andy heads up the department that this position would be in. So what I usually do is I just kind of hand things over to him for the phone call, and I'll jump in here and there when I have questions.
Sure.
Hey, usually what I like to do first is kind of give a brief overview of the company here at Adams and the department in particular. Have you had a chance to look on our website or anything, or do you know much about us?
Yes, I looked at some YouTube videos, and I learned that Adams is, you guys offer internet services, broadband, and I learned that your network is spanning a certain region, and I learned the company had made a huge investment of $21 million in infrastructure and fiber. So at this point, I'm familiar with the services you guys offer.
Okay, that's good to hear. Just to give you a little idea of the size or scope of the company, we have about 90 employees, and as of 3 years ago, we only had about 8,000 broadband subscribers, and now we have around 16 or 17,000. So we've basically doubled our customer base in the last 3 years. And
that's almost double, yep.
Yeah, yep. And like you mentioned, the probably 98% of our customers now are GPON-based fiber to the home customers.
Right.
So we have a little bit of wireless internet and DSL still, but there's really only a couple hundred people left on those services, and we're slowly migrating all of those customers to fiber to the home as well.
Nice.
So that's just a general, sort of size of the company. I'll get into more details here in a bit. And then as far as the department itself, the Network Operations Department, currently there's 6 guys that report to me. So I have 3 guys that we call network technicians, and those are the guys that, install the equipment, rack and stack, power the equipment, maintain the generators, and basically do all of our maintenance in our data centers and do all the driving and field work for the Network Operations Department.
I see.
And then I have 2 guys that work in the NOC with myself and Jason, a network engineer we hired earlier this summer, and a guy that's been with the company for probably 25 years. And then I did have a third shift guy sort of helping out, taking some load off the on-call guy, but he's actually moving to a different department on Monday, so we're also trying to fill a third shift position. But, yeah, so those are the guys that report to me. I guess before I go any further, because my next step is usually I'll just go through your resume and, ask some questions and let you sort of talk free form about them. But before I do that, did you have any questions so far?
I think that was a good overview of the company, so I'll keep my questions for later.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll just basically start with your current position where you're, looks like you're the owner or CEO of AYSIK.
I don't think of myself as a CEO because AYSIK is a one-man show.
Okay.
So I do during the day. I'm usually committed to a project, a 12-month project, 6-month project, 7-month project, and at night I do training. So about 7 years ago, I started a online training program where I train people for their CCNA, CCNP, CCIE, their Cisco certifications, and my classes run 8 to 10 p.m. on weekdays and sometimes on weekends for an hour or 2. And I started with one student about 6 years ago. Today I have about 30 to 40 people in my class. And these are usually people from my country who came here. They have a lot of education from back home, but they're not able to transfer that knowledge in the U.S. market. So I help them get certified so they can find work. I started doing that at night. During the day, I'm still doing my usual network engineering work.
Okay, so it sounds like you're a busy guy.
I enjoy working. I work many hours. My typical day is about 17, 18 hours.
Yeah, that's a lot for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I guess to start with, just sort of focus on what you do during the day. So, I mean, I read over the bullet points that you have listed here on your resume. I didn't know if you had a couple examples of some projects recently that you're working on, or current ones you're working on, that you wanted to maybe describe a little bit.
Sure. So the recent and current projects are all around design, architecture. So it's usually a company that wants, for example, I would say more than 50% of my projects the past 2-3 years were a company wanted, like for example, Lennar, a company in Miami. They had a data center. They build and sell homes across the country. So they have offices in several states. So they had a data center, and they were experiencing outages consistently on their data center every week or so, which was affecting the business. So they hired me to design a brand new data center based on the Nexus technology, 7K, 5K, 2K. So I joined and I looked at the current design, and they had, on the data center, they had two 6500s, and at the access layer, they had about 12 or 14 3750s, and this is where they connected the servers. So before looking into the new design, my goal was to make the network more stable. So I looked at the existing network, I looked at the configurations, and I noticed they didn't have a lot of modularity on the network, which introduced a lot of issues. And not only that, but also it made troubleshooting and resolving issues more complex. So for example, on one 6500, they'll be using a SOUP 32. On the other, they'll be using a SOUP 720, which can work, but it's not efficient. And also at the access layer, the 3750s, it was the same family, but they have different members of that switch family. So also interfaces, when you look at the configurations, interfaces descriptions didn't have a standard, which means every time the operations team is troubleshooting an issue, it seemed like this is the first occurrence because configurations aren't similar, interface descriptions are consistent, OSPF timers aren't the same. So my first step was to achieve modularity in terms of hardware and also modularity in terms of configuration. Then I looked at Cisco's best practices and I implemented best practices. That effort reduced the downtime significantly, but they still wanted to move to a better design. So then I started looking at the 7K, 5K, 2K, and you have many options. For example, on the 7K, you have the 10 slot, the 18 slot, 710, 718. 5K, you have many flavors. 2K, you have 8 flavors, 22, 32, 22, 48. So I researched all the options. I understood the customer requirements, and I made a platform recommendation. Then I worked with the Cisco partner. I created the bill of material. We ordered the equipment. The equipment arrived. We installed them in the data center. We did the configuration. And then I wrote process documents for their operations team to troubleshoot in case they had any issues, because the whole Nexus technology was new to them. That platform wasn't used in the company. So a lot of the projects I did were around building a new network. In some cases, I did some work for Charter recently. Their network was there, but they want to extend the network. So they wanted to it was a network expansion project. So for smaller companies, it's usually building something new. For bigger companies, it's usually deploying a couple more devices on the network.
Right, gotcha. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So on the project you were mentioning, where you worked with the Cisco vendor to order equipment and then it got installed and configured, did you actually do the installation and configuration both yourself then?
Yes, actually I installed the racks, I was in the data center. So I installed the racks, I installed the devices, the cables.
Okay. And so you normally, like in a project like that, would you normally I suppose the company you're working for already had a relationship with a Cisco vendor, or is that something you facilitate as well?
In that specific case, in the Miami case, they had a strong relationship with a Cisco partner in the region. But when I joined, I introduced another partner to our meetings because they had a partner, and he was recommending and this is a partner the company was with for a long time. So he was recommending a design based on the 7K, 5K, 2K. But the goal of management was to reduce cost as much as we can. So I did some research, and I discovered that the partner was right on their design because I proposed the design, they proposed the design before I even joined. So I did some research, and I realized that the partner's design was good, but there's a more cost-effective design because the partner had a 5K installed between the 2K and the 7K. Based on my research, that was a requirement Cisco initially had when they came out with the Nexus, but after a couple of years, they lifted that requirement. So now you can connect a 2K to a 7K directly.
Okay.
So my design was because I had just discovered that this requirement was lifted, a brand new design. The first time I run into a situation where I can connect a 2K to a 7K directly, which was a 20-30% cost reduction. But the partner working with the company didn't agree with that design, so I had to confirm with another partner. So I kind of selected a partner in the region. I worked with them. I met with I met with them at Starbucks in the area, and we confirmed the design. I engaged them, and then we collectively agreed on the 2K 7K design.
Okay, that makes sense. I try to break up things so you don't feel like I'm just asking you a few questions and having you talk, without me intervening here. So I think I'll switch gears a little bit and give you sort of an idea of some of the equipment we have in our network. So basically in the core of our network, we have two Cisco ASR 9010s. So those run IOSXR, and that's,
right.
99% of our customers are fed from those two core routers. So that's sort of one part of the network, and there's some edge routers that connect to that as well. And then obviously the fiber to the home access equipment connects to that equipment as well. But then we have a network that we call the MPLS network. So we basically have a dozen or so Cisco IOSXE and or IOSXR routers that they run MPLS, and the main usage for that is we do a lot of layer 2 Ethernet private line circuits, so mainly for cell sites, so cell carriers in the area, will run layer 2 connections from all of their cell towers back to their main data center. And right. So we basically do that all Ethernet over MPLS over the Cisco routers. I mentioned the MPLS routers. They're mostly ASR 920s, which run XE, and then a few ASR 903s and a few ASR 9006s as well. So that's sort of a little...
Do you guys have any of the 9912 or the 9922s?
Nope. The 9010 is, as of today, is the biggest router we have. But since you asked that, I'll mention that one of the projects that Jason and I are going to start working on, hopefully within the next 2 weeks. I just reached out to our Cisco vendor today, actually, this morning. We're looking at basically upgrading our core routers, some of our border routers, and some of our MPLS transport routers to 100 gig. Basically, we're getting to the point where, we're having to lag multiple 10 gigs together, and it's becoming hard for us to keep up. Basically, we're sort of just barely keeping ahead, and so, we're really going to spend some time on looking at 100 gig, what it would take to implement it, how much it would cost, and I imagine at some point, probably in the summer of this year, here in 2020, we'll implement, some 100 gig in our network. So, that'll basically be replacing some routers, adding different, line cards to the ASR 9010s, that sort of thing.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, as you can imagine, with our customer base doubling in the last 3 years, our our total upstream bandwidth to the rest of the internet has went up, exponentially, basically.
Perfect. That was a question I had earlier. So what's leading the company to grow? Because usually companies that provide similar services to your company, there's a lot of competition, and many companies have been around for a long time. So what I noticed, companies offering internet services aren't growing as much as companies, for example, that are offering cloud services or sort of a new technology. So what's helping you guys grow in a saturated market at this rate?
Yeah, so I guess I'll give a little more company background as well. We're actually a telephone cooperative by trade, so we've been a telephone cooperative for 60-ish years. So we have 13 really small towns. When I say small, I'm talking population of 1,000 people or less in the area, and we did fiber to the home to those towns in 2010. But over the last few years, we've started competing, most recently in Quincy, Illinois, which is actually where Jason and I work every day and where the job posting we have listed reports to, and that's a town of about 40,000 people. And we've always had a presence in Quincy. We've done DSL in Quincy for a lot of years, but when we started deploying fiber to the home, really our only competition was the local incumbent carrier is AT&T. And so even though a town of 40,000 is large for us at Adams, for AT&T, of course, it's not big at all. So they really didn't try to compete with us when we started deploying our fiber to the home product. They don't offer their UVerse product in Quincy, and the cable company is Comcast. Same thing. They have a service, but basically between our name recognition in the area, and we really try to simplify. We don't do any contracts if you're a residential user, so you don't have to sign up for a contract, and we put all of our pricing right on the website.
That's attractive if people don't have to sign a contract, right?
Yep, so that, along with, we just put the pricing right out there, so if you want the 100 meg package, it's going to cost you $49.95 a month or whatever it is. It's all straightforward, and we don't try to hide in fees and that sort of thing. And I guess along those lines, one other thing I'll mention is our management had the idea, so when we started deploying this service, basically the way we do it is we go to a neighborhood in Quincy, and if so many people sign up and give us like a $25 deposit, if we get X amount of sign-ups in that area, then we'll come build in that area. And whatever package you sign up for, speed package you sign up for during that sign-up phase, we guarantee to lock the price in for life. So basically, if you're paying $49.95 today, 2 years from now, we're not going to raise the rates if you stay on your same package.
Perfect.
And it's been a couple weeks since I looked, but the last time I looked, pretty much any town we go into, I only mentioned Quincy, but there are some other towns, smaller towns of 1 or 2 or 3,000 people in the area that we went into as well. We usually get about a 60% take rate in those towns.
Perfect.
Yeah, so that's a lot of the growth. Also, there's several other services I haven't mentioned yet that Adams offers. It's just not something the network operations department handles. So we have a department that does, phone system installs or outsourced IT for small businesses in the area. And we have a number of other services, again, that don't directly fall underneath the network operations department. But those other things that we do as well, help with the bottom line.
Perfect. And when I worked at Level 3 Communications, and you guys obviously know Level 3, so they were offering internet services, but they started a division called Outsourced Opportunities, doing the same thing, helping people with their networks. And that was a very profitable department. Yeah,
we actually, I lose track of time. Let's say it's been 2 or 3 years ago. There was a guy in Quincy that had 2 or 3 employees that did the same thing. Businesses in the area that had 4 or 5 employees, he would do their IT support for them. And we actually purchased his company from him a couple of years ago, and now he works for us, and so he's in the department. It's called the Adams Experts Department that handles, all that small business outsourcing, which in Quincy, a town of 40,000 people, there's quite a few businesses that, have just a couple employees where they can't really justify having their own IT staff, so then we sort of fill that void.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So let's see. I guess I'll switch gears again. One thing I noticed on your resume under the routing protocols, you listed Sonnet. I was just curious what your familiarity is with Sonnet.
So when I worked for Level 3, we had many customers who connected to us via Sonnet. So we had OC3 interfaces, OC12 interfaces. On the backbone had OC48 links, OC196, and obviously the other equivalent for Sonnet, the SDH, so the STM. So I worked a lot with Sonnet because we offered Level 3 the ISP, so we offered so many circuits, and many of the customers connected to us via Sonnet. And when I joined Cisco, when I worked in the LAN switching team, and then I worked in a routing team also a lot of the circuits for a couple of years, 30-40% of our circuits were Sonnet circuits.
Huh, okay, interesting. Yeah, the reason I mentioned it is, although we don't list it in our job posting for network engineering, the network operations department here is also responsible for all of the telephone network here at Adams. The main reason we don't mention it is because it's rare to find somebody that's dealt with both the IP and telephony side of things, but also, it's a network that it's pretty stagnant. There's not a lot of changes going on with it, and the guy that's in the department that's been here for 20 plus years came up on the telephone side, and actually so did I when I started here 14 years ago. So between him and I, we pretty much have it covered, so that's why we don't usually list it, but I thought it'd be a good time to mention that we're responsible for all the telephone network as well, so the telephone switches, the Sonnet networks. We do have some business customers that have SIP trunks with us, so from our soft switch to their phone system, if we have a SIP trunk, the NOC here at Adams is responsible for provisioning that and then doing any troubleshooting on it.
Perfect.
Yeah, so let's flip over here to your next page on your resume here. This was several years ago, so I don't know how much you remember about it, but I'm looking at the section where you did some work either for Microsoft or consulting work for Microsoft, where it says you built out 2 large MPLS networks. I was just curious if you could give me a little information about that project.
Sure. And the Microsoft hired me for this project because I was working for Level 3 Communications, and Level 3, they're offering internet services, but then a customer, EDS, came to us, and EDS is a consulting company, and they have 80 offices across the globe, and they were having a lot of issues with the existing network. So they came to us, and we were a service provider. We weren't a consulting company, but we decided to take on the project. So we looked into their network. We identified that their issues are stemming from 2 things. One, they had a support team in India that wasn't giving them the support level they needed. And 2, they were using ATM, an old technology. So we proposed a brand new design based on MPLS 2547. Initially, there was a lot of resistance from the customer because the cost was so high. I went back to my office and I did a financial analysis based on a model called long-term running incremental cost. And this is something I learned during my master's years at Boulder. And we were able to calculate the cost of 1 bit of traffic on the existing design versus the new proposed design. Customers saw the numbers. They gave us the go-ahead. We got the equipment. We made platform recommendations, configuration, network went live. And then we signed a support contract with them. So I was in the architecture team of Level 3. Then we signed a support contract with them. So our operations team, our NOC, will take over and continue to support the customer. And I became the level 4 support person, meaning if operations had any issues with the network, they'll escalate to me. So this is a project where I was involved in building a 2547 network from the negotiation phase until they became a customer of our NOC. Microsoft wanted to build a similar network because Microsoft traditionally was a devices company. So PCs, laptops. But the company changed direction the past couple of years where now they're into devices and then software like Xbox and other things, and also services like Azure, cloud services. And because the company is changing direction now, they're starting to build various networks for different product teams. So part of my work was helping with the design of a 2547 network, and then we designed an additional network, and then I took the same role I had at level 3, where I took an escalation role where all their out-taskers, is the name used at Cisco for support people in other regions. But Microsoft had many support people in India and other locations, and I became the primary escalation point for all of them. So they had a team of maybe 200, 300 support people in various locations around the world, mainly in India, and I was the person taking escalations in the Seattle office.
Okay. That's interesting to know. So sort of to tie into that a little bit, give you some more background or how it works here at Adams. So there's a Tier 2 department at Adams. They handle all the daily provisioning of the fiber to the home customers. Like I said, we've been adding about 3,000 customers a year. So they do all the daily provisioning. We're unofficially their Tier 3 support. So, of course, if they have any network or wide-scale issues, they come to us. We also do the initial configuration of the fiber to the home access gear. So it's basically just a layer 2 switch, but the vendor is called Calix, C-A-L-I-X. So
I heard of Calix, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So all of our customers are 99% of them are deployed on Calix E7 2s. So those are the chassis, and we do all of the initial firmware upgrades or even ongoing firmware upgrades of those shelves. Build all the VLANs and service profiles to start with, and then we basically hand it off to the Tier 2 department, and they do all the daily provisioning. Unless they have issues, of course, then they come to us in the NOC, and we help them out. Another thing along those lines, just to give you some more insight about the position we're looking for, we really need help in both what I would call network engineering and network architecting. So sort of the way it works now, the guy we hired 6 months ago, he's worked out really well. He does a lot of the actual implementation, making the configuration changes on routers or, changing BGP policies and that sort of thing, which we definitely need, help doing that just from a manpower perspective. But also, really, Jason and I have been the only two since I joined the department 5 years ago or so, we're really the only two that do any architecting or design work, really. So obviously you've had a lot of experience on the design side of things as well. But I just wanted to let you know, we basically need help in both areas. So just trying to paint a picture of what we're looking for, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Perfect. And a lot of my experience has been around BGP. And for example, because at level 3, I had various positions with the company. I started as an intern, I became a support person, then a dedicated support person for the top 3 customers, and then moved to the architecture team. But in all these positions, all our circuits were BGP. So I was working with BGP every day, especially when I was in support, at least 3, 4, maybe 5 BGP issues a day.
Okay, yeah, I was guessing by some of the size of some of the companies you've worked for that you've dealt with a lot of things on a fairly regular basis.
Sure.
That is actually one of the challenging things about basically just the size of our company is, you have to be knowledgeable, for instance, in BGP or setting up BGP neighbors and policies and that sort of thing. But then we might not have to do anything with it for 6 months, just because of the size of the size of the network. But yeah, that's good to know, though. One other sort of network thing I wanted to mention that I don't think I had yet that we're also responsible for is we also have a DWDM network. So I don't know if you have any familiarity with DWDM.
Yes, I'm familiar with DWDM and dense wave division multiplexing, and I learned a bit about DWDM when I was doing my master's program, but then I had more exposure to DWDM when I worked at Amazon, because Amazon, they're building data centers constantly. So every day they're coming up with a couple of new data centers in various locations around the world. And they're hiring a lot of people to help with building these new data centers. So at Amazon, I was able to build data centers in 2 regions. And the way they design the data centers is, for example, let's say in Denver, for example, they'll build a parent data center, and that's usually a large data center. And then they'll have 4 child data centers in the same region. And the connection between all these data centers is DWDM. That way they have availability. They call it an availability zone. So anytime they make a decision to build a data center somewhere, child data centers have to be built in the same area, and the connection is via DWDM.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, we've had DWDM equipment in our network for several years, but we just bought some. Basically, we replaced our legacy DWDM network with Cisco DWDM equipment within the last couple of years. It's the NCS 2006 platform for the most part everywhere in our network.
Right.
So, yep, just another thing that we're responsible for here at Adams, the configuration of circuits across that, and troubleshooting and maintenance and that sort of thing.
Perfect.
All right, I was going to jump to, looks like when you were at Cisco, one of your roles there, I thought it was an interesting bullet point. I thought maybe you could expand on it. It says here you submitted a patent for review pertaining to BGP route reflectors.
True. So when I was in the high touch team is a team that supports Cisco's major accounts. These are people who pay 7 times as much as the average customer, and for that they have very strict SLAs. Usually issues had to be resolved within 2 hours, maximum 4 hours. So I had a call from a customer in India, Tata. Tata is an ISP in India, and they have their consulting arm here, Tata Consultancy Services. So I got a call from an engineer in India, and the customers in the high touch team were people like Facebook, Verizon, and then large ISPs around the world. So I got a call from the customer, and he said, I have a route reflector, and I have 3 clients. And he was seeing, let's say, 80 routes on the first client, 80 on the second, but he's seeing 90 routes on the third client. The numbers should match. All clients should have the same number of routes, but he was seeing 80, and 90. So I worked with the customer, I looked at the configuration, and then we couldn't identify why the numbers weren't matching, so I escalated to the business unit. So our next escalation point, we were an escalation team, so our next escalation point was the business unit. These are the guys that write the code, write the iOS. So I escalated to the business unit, and the software developers, they said they don't have bandwidth to help because this customer is not down. They have major issues they're working on, and they don't have the resources to help this customer because the customer wasn't down. It wasn't a down situation. Network was working fine, but he made an observation. So I didn't want to go back to the customer with this kind of answer. So I went home, and for 3-4 nights, I stayed up till 4 in the morning reading RFCs, BGP RFCs, specifically sections relating to BGP and route reflection. And what I learned that Cisco's implementation of BGP and route reflection works, but it's not 100% in line with the standard. So I called the customer and I said, our devices work, You're not going to experience any issues, but our design is just not 100% in line with the standard. And that's all the customer wanted. So it was a situation where I was dealing with a customer who was far more knowledgeable than myself and my business unit when it came to standards. And he wanted an explanation. So once I explained what's happening and what the standard says and how Cisco devices are designed, customer was okay with the answer. So then I filed we have like forms at Cisco we fill out. I filled out some forms. I submitted them to the legal team. And internally we call it an enhancement. So, and until this day, but that's how Cisco had all the routers designed at that time. So the decision was to consider this for future designs. The difference between Cisco, and to get into the technicalities of it, the standard says if you have 3 clients, one with 3 routes, the other with 4, and the third with 5 routes, the RFC says if a client sends his routes to the reflector should send them to all other clients, but should not return them back to the original client, which means all devices will end up having the same number of routes, no matter which client started with the maximum number of routes. The way Cisco is doing it is if a client sends routes to a reflector, the reflector will send them to client 2, client 3, but will also return the routes to the sending client, which is client 1. So the client who had more routes initially will double his routes. So he'll end up having more routes than the other 2 clients. Cisco had a way of using the originator ID attribute to drop these routes once they come back again to the advertising client. But they're still counted as received routes, or they're still counted as routes. So they're still received, and that's why the customer was seeing that the numbers weren't aligning.
Interesting. So if you did I guess depends on whether it was iOS or XR, but basically if you did a show BGP neighbor and you were looking at the number of received routes, it would have your own in it, even though you couldn't see those routes if you ran other commands because they were being dropped. True.
So you can do show IP BGP neighbor IP address route, and then you could do received routes, as you know, like soft reconfiguration inbound. So you could look at both what's received and what was accepted. But yes, you will see the client with, so if you had 3 clients, 80 routes, 90 routes, the one with the 90 routes, because he's going to receive the 90 routes back again, he's going to end up having more number of routes than the rest.
Do you happen to know, that's interesting, do you happen to know, is that still how it works today, by chance?
It's, yes, that's still how it works today, and Cisco, they didn't change it because it was not only, so usually when you file an enhancement and when you file a bug, and because we work with customers every day, customers bring to us a lot of bugs. And usually once a bug is identified, you file as a Cisco employee, you file a bug, and it's usually resolved within a month or 2. And usually bugs are affecting one family, one member, and sometimes just one specific iOS version. On that case, they didn't call it a bug, so they wanted me to report it as an enhancement. Why? Because it didn't affect the operation of the device. Yes, it's not in line with the standard, but it didn't affect the network, so the devices worked as expected. So they called it an enhancement, and also it's affecting all Cisco devices, so all families, all routers, all iOS. So it was a huge cost investment to make the change on all platforms. And for that reason, it's considered an enhancement. That way, at a future date, Cisco can decide if they want to make that change or not. So it wasn't perceived as a bug, because a bug had to be resolved immediately. But it was perceived as an enhancement, something we're doing, something that's working, but maybe not in line with the standards 100%. So then there are other teams at Cisco that may or may not make that decision to make the change. But it's recognized as something that had to be enhanced.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm sure if it's written into everything, they're not going to really want to change it, especially if it's not service affecting. So.
Sure.
But that's interesting because we use route reflection. To be honest with you, I've never looked to see that particular or to notice that particular anomaly. So, all right, just looking through my notes here. Let's see, while I'm doing that, did you have any more questions for me?
So the question I'll have for both of you is I would say what helps you personally succeed? Because what I learned today, both of you have been with the company for some time. So what helps you personally succeed at Adams? Success factors are different from a person to another. So I would say what helps you personally succeed at the company?
I'd say for me, one of the big advantages of the company in general is, the ability to, you can always get promoted from within, or basically anything you want to learn, the company's all for. If you want to learn it on your own, that's fine. If there's some sort of training you find that you think would be useful, they're fine with that as well. Just to give you a little background, when I started 14 years ago, I started on the telephone side, but I had no experience with anything basically. I was essentially a DSL installer for a subcontractor the year prior to starting at Adams. But when I started at Adams, they moved me into the central office department, which is the department that handles all the telephone, or did handle all of the telephone network at the time. And, they basically said, we know there's a learning curve. It'll take you probably, I think they said at the time, 12 to 18 months to get up to speed. So I sort of took that as a personal challenge to do it quicker than that. But I guess just in general, the ability to get promoted from within. And like I said, I've been here 14 years. Jason's been here 16. And even though we didn't work in the same department for a lot of years, we're a small enough company. We were especially small back then. If you had any questions about anything, you could go run it by Jason or somebody else, and they'd help you out. If you wanted to set up a lab, that sort of thing. So that was a big benefit to me.
So I would probably agree with Andy on the promotion from within. I would also say that, there's never a lack of something new to do here for us. Technology's changing so quickly, and there's the demand on the network is growing so fast that we're always getting to do new and interesting things. One thing for me, I wasn't at a company near the size of a Level 3 or an AT&T, but I was a corporate type environment where the company I was at before, I didn't know who the board members were. I had the CEO didn't know my name, anything like that. So, with the size of Adams and just kind of the way the company, the feel of the company, the way things work here, everybody knows everybody else. We're all on first name basis with the CEO.
That's what I expected when you guys said 90 employees, because the number was 90, if I remember correct.
Right. It's
right.
It's getting close to the 100 point.
Right.
But yeah, the board members that we have, they're all local. They all live in our communities, so it's not uncommon to run into a board member at the gas station or something, and so it's just a lot because of that environment, because of the more personal touch. It's a lot easier for people at the I guess you'd say for people at the top levels to see to see your contribution and to recognize that.
Sure. And the other question I had also was, usually at every company there is a challenge. For example, at every company there's this one new technology or something that was just recently installed that the network team doesn't necessarily have prior experience with. So in my experience, it's mostly the newest technology. And sometimes when I worked at Cisco, for example, in the support, the challenge was an older technology. We got a customer who was running F25, an old technology. No one in the team was interested to go back in time and learn F25 because they're not going to be able to use it in the future. And in my experience, I learned when you agree to work on these projects, whether it's something new or something old, just a challenge. When you are willing to work on these things, you build excellent relationships with team members. So my question is what are the challenges for the team or for the network team today? What platforms, what technologies?
I would say, so just beyond actual workload, I would say probably the DWDM network, which is a little strange to say because it's not a part of the network that changes very much, but it does transport critical circuits. But the reason I mention it is because if you go back, that was about 2 years ago we started that project. So prior to 2016, anything that came along project-wise or new technology-wise, Jason and I learned it if we needed to learn it, if it was something new, and we implemented it from the ground up. So as an example,
and that's the NCS.
Yeah, so I guess I should mention, yeah, the NCS 2006 is the DWDM equipment. But prior to that equipment, anything that came up, Jason and I just handled. So like these Cisco ASR 9010s, when we bought those 6 years ago or whatever it was, we'd never used iOS XR, which there's not a big learning curve for that. But basically when we bought those routers, we configured them from the ground up, and that's how we've always done everything here at Adams. But when we bought the NCS equipment, we were so short-handed and so our workload was so great that was the first time since I've worked here that we actually had the vendor that we bought the equipment from. We installed and powered the equipment, but then they came in and did the initial configuration, and they actually did the initial building of the first few circuits. And because of that, basically our knowledge, I mean, I understand fundamentally how it works, but my knowledge on the DWDM network is a lot less than it is on everything else, just because we had somebody else do it, which we don't like to do for this exact reason, because then we don't have as much knowledge on it. But it was mainly just a workload thing. So actually,
with the growth and everything, I imagine the workload is probably high.
Yeah, and on that DWDM equipment, we actually had a gentleman start with us that didn't have prior networking experience, and he was interested in networking, and we actually sent him. We had some vouchers for Cisco classes, so he took an online week-long Cisco class on the NCS platform. Then, unfortunately, a few months later, he took a job elsewhere. But so that network for sure, while I understand fundamentally how it works, I don't understand it, or we don't understand it probably to the level that we would like to.
Yeah, the Cisco training classes are excellent, because when I was at Cisco, you can sign up. We had a budget for, I think, $4,000, $5,000 per engineer per month. So you can sign up to many classes. And what I learned, taking a class, you quickly able to translate that when you're working with the customers. Their classes are designed to give you the technology, the platform, the hardware, but also at the same time the common issues that you will encounter. So I found Cisco classes extremely helpful.
Yeah. I should mention too, I guess, since we were talking about workload, Jason is actually the network operations manager for another telephone company about 2 hours away from here. So 2 days a week he travels up there because he's got a handful of guys that report to him up there. The reason I am pointing that out is because it's pretty clear at some point, I mean, as soon as this year or the first quarter of this year even, they don't have any network engineers. They're a smaller company than us. They basically just have guys that do installation and powering of equipment. So I can see us at Adams taking over basically their network engineering responsibilities. Right now, Jason does all of it essentially himself. So yeah, so when it comes to workload, he's got that to deal with too. And then
I'm used to it, and I would say 90%. Actually, I would say the positions I enjoyed most were, for example, like the high touch position at Cisco. It's supposed to be a 9 to 5, but it's never 9 to 5, because let's say if a Facebook data center is down 3 in the morning, I have to get up. and start to and connect to the customer on a WebEx and start working. So it was almost like a 24/7. We were responding to outages all day, and I like to work. Usually, I have a lot more patience when it comes to working long hours.
Yeah,
my wife doesn't like it much.
Right.
It helps me become a better engineer, not a better husband, but hey, that's who I am.
Yeah, for sure. I will say that I mentioned earlier on about we have a guy, he's leaving the department on Monday to go to a different department, but he was our third shift guy. We actually implemented that third shift position earlier last summer simply because, we have an on-call rotation because we're not a 24/7 NOC just because of the size. So the four of us in the NOC, we're on call for 1 week and then off for 3. And we actually had that guy start the third shift position to kind of help with some of the maintenance window items and some of the troubles that come in after hours, just for everybody's sanity. So
I see.
So it's good to know you like work, but we do try to, we, as best we can with the growth of our company, we're trying to cut down on all the after hours stuff because Jason and I have been doing it for 15 years too, so we know what it's like. So we try to cut down on it as much as possible.
Perfect.
Jason, did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
Well, I was just going to add to that. The challenges, I would say our biggest challenge is staffing, which is why we're trying to find people now. We've been trying to fill, we've been looking for network engineering help for probably at least a year now, just because of the growth of the network and the challenges of trying to keep up with everything. Andy mentioned the GWDM platform as being something that's pretty foreign to us. Another thing that we're going to need to start spending some time on pretty soon is IPv6, which, again, is something that we could do if we had the time for it, but, there's only so many things we can do. So, the biggest challenge is finding, good people to join the team and help out.
And I worked with IPv6 recently for charter communications, and this project gave me a lot of exposure to IPv6. And also, the past couple of months, I had to learn a lot more about IPv6 because I teach online classes at night, and Cisco introduced IPv6 on their curriculum more than any time before. So I would say past couple of months, I've been learning a lot of IPv6.
And one question I just thought of, you have, since you mentioned you do training in the evenings, is so you currently have these training courses going on. Has the new CCNA came out, or is that not out yet? I don't remember.
It did came out, and the last day to take, and that's why these days my students are telling me to try to finish the class within a week or two, because the last day for the old curriculum is the 24th, I think, of February. And then after the 24th, people will have to take the test based on the new curriculum.
Gotcha. And is that, I haven't read a whole lot about it, I just heard about it, but when they go to the new class or the new test, can you still take it in two parts, or do you have to take it all at once?
That I have to find out. I looked at the new books, and the books are still, there's two authors that I usually like to learn from. The books are still part 1, part 2. I'm just not sure if the exam, actually, yes, the exam is one. One student told me 2 days ago, you can take one exam. So there's an option to take one exam.
Okay.
And there's an option to take 2.
Okay, so you can still take 2 even though it's just, they're getting rid of the CCENT, I thought, the actual certification called CCENT, but...
Right, true. And this is not something I had the time to confirm, but I was talking to someone 2 days ago, and he told me this. There's also an option to bypass the CCNA and go directly for the CCNP. Because the way I do my classes is I don't teach the CCNA and then have them take the test. I spend 6-7 months with them, and I teach them CCNA, CCNP combined. And then if somebody wants to go for the CCIE, then I have additional classes for them. So if someone was telling me that you can if somebody has the knowledge, they can bypass the CCNA and go directly for the CCNP. But the main changes I noticed, even the old curriculum is not really old because it was also changed recently a couple of months ago. So a couple of months ago, they introduced IPv6 at a much rate than it was in the past. And I imagine the new curriculum, I'm still on chapter 4 or 5, going through the new books and everything. But I imagine also the new curriculum will have also a lot of IPv6.
Yeah, I would imagine.
So I've got a couple other questions that are a little less technical. So first, I was just curious about why you're looking to get away from doing your consulting business.
The environment I enjoyed most, and this is what makes Adam a great choice. The environment I enjoyed out of all the companies I worked for, I was happiest at level 3, being a service provider, owning a network, and then having to work on design recommendations, architectural work, implementation, configuration, or support. So ISP, we own our network, we make the changes on the network. So I would say my position is at level 3. My experience at level 3 was a rich experience. I learned a lot in terms of routing and switching at level 3. When I worked with the high-touch team at Cisco, a lot of our customers, because we supported major accounts, a lot of our customers were also providers. And in my experience, I can go to a company, to an enterprise, help them upgrade their data centers, and I enjoy that kind of work too. But I gravitate towards working for a company that owns a network.
Okay. And then my other question was just, it looks like pretty much everywhere you worked is fairly large companies, whereas, coming on here, we're looking at around 100, next year, this current, I guess now it's 2020. Got to remind myself of that. Here in 2020, we're probably looking to add another 10 to 15 people this year, but it's a pretty big difference between, our size and the size that you've worked for before. Just curious,
there are usually two things that I pay attention to when I'm working, whether it's small, medium, or large company. I look at two things. Am I able to add value? If I'm adding value, and if I'm learning, and these are usually if a company owns a network, we have our own infrastructure, we're making changes from time to time, both will be there. I'll be adding value, and I'll be learning. These are the things I usually pay attention to. I don't pay a lot of attention to the size of the company, but I noticed big companies like to call people for interviews who were working for bigger companies. For example, I was working for Cisco. I never applied for Microsoft, but I got a call from a recruiter, and he said, hey, I want to connect you with Microsoft. I flew, I met them in the Seattle office, they hired me. Then I got a call from another recruiter. He said, I want to connect you with Amazon, and I did. So what I learned, at some point, I got a call from Facebook. We did 2 phone interviews. They went well. I went and I met them on site, and that didn't go well because Facebook is not using Cisco devices or anything. They're building their own routers, and they use Python extensively. I'm familiar with Python, but I'm not an expert in Python by any means. So it wasn't a good match. But still, I made a lot of progress during the interview process and everything. So what I learned, big companies like to hire from big companies. Even when I go to the interviews, people are interviewing me. If I'm interviewing with Facebook, it's likely that the person doing the interview was working for Microsoft prior. I remember an interviewer was telling me he was also at Microsoft at some point. So I think for some reason, maybe recruiters think that if you work for Amazon, you'll do really well at Facebook, which is not necessarily true. It's all network engineering work. If you know the protocols, platforms, the size of the company doesn't matter much. So what I'm saying is it happened that way. It's a coincidence. It happened that way. But I get calls from big companies more than I receive calls from medium-sized companies.
Okay.
But to answer the question, if I have to pick between, for example, working at for Facebook or for Adams, I'll pick Adams. I'd rather be working on the ASR and working on designs and architectures than writing Python automation scripts all day for a product that's only used at Facebook that I'm not going to see anywhere else.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I didn't have any other questions, Ehab. For you, your resume pretty much speaks for itself, so I don't usually go into, asking, questions that are going to appear on a CCNA exam or anything like that. So I think I've got a pretty good feel of everything. Did you have any questions for us?
I think you answered all my questions, and I enjoyed the conversation.
That's good to hear. Jason,
Yeah, I think Andy and I will talk amongst ourselves here, and what we usually do is we'll get back with Sean from the recruitment side and let him know if we were to proceed to the next step. What we usually do is we offer to pay expenses to have you come out and visit us on site, and we spend about half a day going through some kind of a more in-depth deep dive of what we have for networks and what projects we have going on and things like that. But if you're open to that, I'll Andy and I will get together and talk to Sean.
Perfect.
All right. Well, you will hear from Sean then. Appreciate your time today.
All right. Thank you much. Bye-bye.
Thank
all
you.
right, thanks, Ehab. See you.
Bye.